Hey everybody, this is Ryan. I'm going to be doing this one solo. Um, Essentially, just figured it'd be fairly easy for me to knock this one out. I ended up playing this game for about 2 sessions on stream, and given I don't have access to play the game anymore, it's no longer on Game Pass. I figured I would just use my Twitch VOD of having played it. Should give enough information in this circumstance. But anywho, this game is Deliver Us the Moon. It is a walking simulator, much like what you would see in if you watched our Call of the Sea, get a taste of, much like Call of the Sea. You're walking around an environment, picking up stuff to inspect it, turning around, reading things that may divulge different information that would kind of tell you about the story of the world and the story in the general sense of what's going on in this world. Um, Pretty much the gist of what you're doing in this game and your objective is you are what appears to be some level of astronaut, and given that you are essentially let me see here. Oops. Okay. Let me see. Uh, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Um, Essentially the gist of what the story of is in this game is that what you kind of see here on this piece of newspaper clipping is you're an astronaut who is trying to restart this MPT system. This MPT system is ultimately responsible for sending energy back to the planet Earth, as it seems, somehow being fueled by a resource known as helium 3. Whether or not that is or is not a real thing, I don't know. But ultimately, it's this giant radar dish looking thing that just kind of laser blasts energy back to the Earth itself, of which somehow there's some system on the Earth to pick up that energy and turn it into, you know, it turns that into energy that people can use on the Earth. And so the Earth is essentially a barren wasteland at this point. It is completely fallen apart and is um, otherwise a shit show based on how they make things seem. And other than just like the basic story stuff, like that's really is kind of the most of it that you need to know from the get go. The gameplay, kind of like what I mentioned with it being a walking simulator, is you really just walk around picking up stuff, reading things. It's a little bit more, I would say, interactive, and there are more things to do in this game than a Call of the Sea. Given Call of the Sea was mostly just like environmental puzzle solving, this is, I would say, both environmental puzzle solving and like having to move around in a 3D environment. So given that there's going to be some zero G moments where there is no gravity, you're going to have to kind of rotate yourself on an XYZ plane in order to get through certain rooms and do certain things along those lines, as well as obviously solving puzzles and picking up things to power certain nodes and taking those nodes out to go unpower them and just certain things along those lines. Let me see. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I'm particularly forgetting to describe that I wanted to mention. I think the only other thing I really wanted to mention about this game is that, um, how do I put it? I would say like I was fairly under the impression from the get go that this was going to be a just pure walking simulator. So you're really not interacting with much, you're not doing much that's different beyond just walking through an environment in this game. Um, and the environments themselves are fairly rote and not all that interesting, given that, you imagine like a movie like Interstellar, kind of like what you're seeing here on the screen. It's a lot of this. It's a lot of like white buildings and otherwise not super interesting environments because it's all just like white astronauty kind of like space flight um, kind of buildings and structures and things along those lines. And this is probably the most colorful it gets, honestly speaking, given that you're still on Earth at this point, I believe. And so, as you can see, as I said, it's a shit show. It's a barren wasteland at this point. and then you're going up to a station of some sort till it then takes you down to the surface of the moon. And the station itself is again mostly like just whites and grays and blacks in regards to color and in regards to structure. And then the moon itself is obviously just a lot of the same stuff with a lot of gray, given the moon is fairly gray. Um, so not particularly interesting to look at. Um, and otherwise, like the one thing that I will give it credit for, which I was going to get into a little bit a second ago, was that my expectation was it was going to be a pure walking sim, and it didn't turn out to be that. There are a couple mechanics throughout the game that make it a little bit more interesting. Obviously, as you can see here, you're in a third person perspective and you switch into a first person perspective occasionally. And so those do have different interactive moments, given just the difference in perspective, as well as I mentioned, the zero G moments where you're having to float around and kind of rotate yourself on an X, Y, and Z axis. So that means you're having to float up, down, having to literally rotate in space because you can't just be upside down in a room or whatever the case may be. As well as uh, there's like you can jump in this game, like you can run and jump. So there are some moments where you literally have to run and jump as if you're doing some like not super great 3D platforming, um, combined with I'm trying to think. Like there's like a weird stealth section in this game, which I hope is not spoiling too much, but it's not super good. And honestly, a lot of it you can just run through because they intend on you just kind of hiding behind certain things to avoid being seen. And there's very clear like cones of vision for the things that would otherwise be looking for you. But if you wanted to, you kind of could just run through it, I think, and you'd manage to be fine as long as you knew where you were going. Because I think they even hamper themselves in that stealth moment because they show you exactly the path that you're supposed to take to get through all of the enemies unseen, if that makes any sense. And so I wish they kind of hadn't done that because it would have made that section a little bit more difficult because I got through it pretty much on my first try, my first or second try. Because the first time I literally just run, and then the second time I just took it a little bit slower, and then got there within like I think a minute and a half. It was not a super long or contrived section. Um, there's a lot of like pushing and pulling of objects, and like having to put this large object here so that way you could climb on top of it in order to get to this other section or whatever the case may be. Um, there is actually like a rover in this game that you can drive around, and then there's like kind of like aiming radar dishes at other radar dishes, so that way they can sync up to one another and transmit power or whatever the case may be. So I will give it credit in that it's not a pure walking sim. There's me. Well, I was trying to avoid that, but that's fine. Um, it is like a pure. It's not a pure walking simulator. It does do a few things more than just the typical walking sim, but that's pretty much the gist of what I'd have to say about A Deliverance to the Moon. Given what you see here, this is kind of a lot of it. I'll skip forward here a bit here and there. Um, I believe this is. I don't believe we've taken off quite yet because there's a launch sequence here, which takes you up into the station itself. And then now you can kind of see here that I'm floating around and I'm having to rotate, kind of like as I mentioned. And so there's a lot of this where you're rotating around in a zero G environment and having to, that's right. And there's like also moments where you're having to like collect oxygen because you can run out of oxygen, and that will result in you dying and having to restart from a checkpoint or whatever the case may be. Um, yeah, that really is a lot of it. I think I've done enough of an explanation of what I needed to say here. So thanks for watching. Appreciate everybody, and I hope to see y'all in the next one. See ya.